Welcome back to Murder on Record, where every case is etched in blood and the truth is buried in the fine print. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we dig through the dusty files, the overlooked evidence, and the whispered testimonies to bring long-forgotten crimes back into the light. Today, we're plunging into the really disquieting story of Shari and Dwight Tobyne.
Yeah, this one's tough.
It really is.
Yeah.
What looked like just an ordinary marriage took this, well, shockingly violent turn with Shari's confession to Dwight's brutal murder.
It's that confession that just hits you straight away, doesn't it?
It does. And it's a case that leaves us grappling not just with the what happened, but really profoundly with the why.
Exactly. That's the core question, isn't it? What chain of events, what internal state leads to such a catastrophic end within a marriage? Shari's confession feels like just the very first layer.
Right. It hints at so much more going on beneath the surface.
Definitely deeper, darker complexities in their lives,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So our deep dive today isn't just about, listing the grim facts, but really trying to explore those open questions that kind of haunt this case. We'll trace the known timeline, sure, but our main focus is going to be on the whys. The things the source material sort of points to but doesn't fully spell out.
Right. Like, what could possibly have driven Shari to do this? And crucially, what actually happened to her after this horrific admission?
Let's start with who these people were. What do we know about them?
Well, the source introduces the main players, Shari and Dwight Tobyne, the couple right at the center of it all.
Okay.
And of course, law enforcement gets involved pretty quickly after Dwight disappears.
Naturally.
Yeah. The source doesn't really detail specific witnesses, names and such, but it's safe to assume investigators talk to people who knew them, friends, family, that sort of thing.
Standard procedure. Okay, so the timeline, as far as we know it, it kicks off with Dwight being reported missing.
Right, which, that can be alarming right away, but often it starts with just uncertainty. Is he just late? Did something happen?
Yeah, that initial confusion.
Precisely. And in those early stages, law enforcement, they're doing preliminary checks, talking to people, trying to figure out his routines. Any reason he might have just left.
And the source says Shari was cooperating at this point.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Initially, she seems to be cooperating with the police efforts.
Which makes what happens next just jarring, that confession.
Totally jarring.
What makes someone cooperate and then just admit to something so violent? Was there, like, a specific moment in the investigation or maybe just the pressure?
Those are the key questions, aren't they? It's hard to say without more detail. Maybe the weight of it all just became too much?
Could be.
Or perhaps a specific piece of evidence came up or a line of questioning that just broke through. We can only really speculate about the psychology there. But however it happened, that confession obviously completely changed the direction of the whole investigation.
Oh, completely. And then the discoveries that followed. I mean, they paint such a gruesome picture. Dwight's dismembered remains found scattered, not just hidden, but scattered across 3 different counties.
Yeah. That detail is incredibly chilling.
What does that specific action, the dismemberment, the scattering over distance, what does that usually suggest to investigators?
Well, scattering remains across multiple jurisdictions like that. It's a pretty significant indicator.
Of what?
It almost always suggests a very calculated, very conscious effort to prevent identification of the body.
Right. Make it harder to find everything.
Exactly. And to hinder the investigation itself. Forcing different police departments to coordinate, making it tougher to piece the evidence together. It really speaks to someone determined to try and erase the victim completely.
Wow. Calculated is definitely the word. It certainly sounds that way. Now, the source hints at potential motives. You sometimes see things like money, jealousy, maybe ongoing conflicts.
The common ones.
Right. We don't know Shari's specific reason, but can we just touch on why these things sometimes escalate so terribly within a marriage?
Sure. In really close relationships, these factors, money, jealousy, arguments, they can get tangled up with intense emotions, right? Feelings of betrayal, resentment.
Yeah.
Financial problems can create enormous stress. Jealousy, well, that can fuel rage, a need for control, and just long-running conflicts. If they're never resolved, if they just fester,
They can explode.
unfortunately, yes, they can reach these awful boiling points. But again, it's crucial to remember these are just general possibilities. Shari's actual reasons, unknown from this source.
So we have this brutal act, we have the confession, we have these potential background tensions, but the precise spark, still missing.
Elusive. Yeah.
And then there's the trial mentioned. The source says prosecutors initially pushed for the death penalty.
which tells you something about how serious they viewed the crime and the evidence they thought they had.
Definitely signals the gravity, but but then the source just stops. No final verdict mentioned.
Yeah, that's a pretty big gap, isn't it? The lack of info on the trial's conclusion.
Huge gap.
It leaves you wondering, did they stick with pursuing the death penalty? Was there some kind of plea deal maybe? What was the final sentence? We just don't know.
It really is like a missing chapter. You're left hanging, wondering about the justice aspect, the accountability. What do you make of the source itself? It presents all this horror, but the tone seems quite neutral, informative.
Well, that neutral tone, it kind of lets you focus just on the known facts, right? Without getting swayed by emotional language.
True.
It just lays out the information and sort of invites you, the listener, to think about the implications and the questions yourself, which can be pretty effective, actually. Allows for your own reflection.
That makes sense. And thinking more broadly, even without knowing the specific why here, this case definitely touches on, well, the grim reality of domestic violence, the potential for extreme violence in relationships.
Absolutely. The sheer brutality described here likely brought a lot of public attention at the time.
I bet.
And probably sparked some difficult conversations about, how things can escalate so tragically.
Yeah. It connects to those bigger societal questions, doesn't it?
It does. Cases like this often make us look at power dynamics in relationships, warning signs of conflict escalating, and what support systems are out there or maybe aren't out there for people in trouble. And the fact that we don't have a clear motive here can be particularly unsettling. It just highlights that hidden complexity that can exist even in relationships that look ordinary from the outside.
Right. So let's quickly recap what we actually know. Shari Tobyne confessed to murdering her husband, Dwight.
Yeesh.
His dismembered body was found scattered across 3 counties.
Check. Highly suggestive of a cover-up attempt.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But the precise motive driving her to this extreme act, still a mystery based on what we have.
Total mystery. And the final outcome of the trial, her sentence, also unknown from this source.
It leaves you with this really stark contrast, doesn't it? On one hand, you have the undeniable, brutal, physical evidence. On the other, these massive questions about the why and the final legal resolution.
Exactly. It really shows the limits of what we can know sometimes, even when some facts seem so clear-cut. The human element, the psychology, that remains murky.
It truly forces you to consider the hidden depths, the potential for unimaginable violence that can exist within even the closest relationships, even when the specific reasons remain, well, frustratingly just out of reach.
Disturbing thought to end on.
Until next time, stay curious and keep your eyes on the evidence.